All right, we are here, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with me this morning. My name is Devin Rossiter. I'm a professional development specialist with DreamBox Math, coming to you by way of Bakersfield, where I worked with Bakersfield City School District for 10 years as a classroom educator at a dual language school in a sixth grade self-contained classroom to all subjects. As a district level instructional specialist, all grades K through 8. Bakersfield City School District, largest K through 8 district in the state of California. There's not really a lot of K through 8 districts, so qualifiers for the win. I also worked as an academic coach at our largest middle school. And for the last 10 seasons, I've also co-hosted a local television program where students call in with homework problems and we work them out live on the air to model conceptual discourse and provide visibility and a platform for students to demonstrate success throughout town. I'm also a Google for Education certified innovator, trainer, coach, mentor, champion. And I am passionate about math and ed tech. And so this is my professional passion to be with you today on regards to diving in with DreamBox. So we've got a lot of ground to cover over the course of the next hour. I'm thrilled that you decided to be here with me for this time together. If you haven't had a chance yet to do so, make sure you fill in that sign-in sheet to make sure that you get credit for the time that you put in and are compensated appropriately for that. If you've already signed in, no need to do it again, but we want to make sure that everybody has that visibility and access. In addition to that, we want to make sure that everybody has clarity on how to go through that process, as well as other elements in making sure that it's all lined up. So I'm going to put the links here in the chat too. If you want to get paid using your PD hours, make sure you refer to the first bit.ly that is there. Additionally, make sure you sign in through the San Francisco Unified Events page, the sign-in form. And you want to make sure that you submit those total hours on your personal PD template. If you used any of your 18 PD hours, you have to input those into your timesheet in EM Power SF. Make sure you get that credit for that. So I just want to make sure up the forefront that housekeeping is set and squared away with everybody. In regards to our time together, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about DreamBox. Now, DreamBox is purchased and available for all teachers. This is going to be for all students. It is district-wide this year, and so our time together is going to be a refresher or a kickstart to those that might not be familiar with DreamBox. So we're going to talk a little bit about DreamBox, provide a big, broad, big picture overview of what the platform does in supporting students on their math journey through an adaptive platform to encourage agency and support learner dignity. We're also going to talk a little bit about the opportunity for you to explore the student experience for yourself. So what does it feel like to be a student playing through a lesson within DreamBox? We'll talk a little bit about some implementation approaches and things to keep in mind, strategies in launching DreamBox in your classroom for the upcoming school year. And then lastly, we'll navigate through the educator dashboard. Now, with Clever Rostering, we understand that people have different roles, that you might have different access to platforms within Clever through San Francisco Unified. So if you don't currently see DreamBox in your Clever dashboard, make sure you check in with putting in a ticket through your IT team to make sure that you get that request in. If you can't access today, that's okay. I'm going to be very intentional and visual on how we navigate through elements of the DreamBox dashboard. Additionally, I want to make sure that everybody feels as if their voice and time is honored and valued. With the way that the rooms are structured, the chats are somewhat limited. So if you do have any questions, make sure you put them into the chat. I will do my best to keep up with them and address them as needed. Something that can be very helpful in that regards. As we utilize the chat as our main vehicle of interaction, if you have a question or a wondering for the chat, enter that and send that to me utilizing all caps. I know some of you are like, all right, yelling on the internet, I'm down, let's go. I will not perceive your question as getting yelled. I used to do minor league hockey play-by-play announcing here in Bakersfield. They have message boards. I've been yelled at on the internet plenty. I will not take your question in the same light. But when a question does come through in all caps, it gets my attention. You can't miss it. You notice it. So I want to make sure that I see it so I can formulate a time and response that's appropriate to the flow of our conversation. Also keep in mind that when you do put in that question, It doesn't go out to everybody. I don't believe we have that capability. So if you do have a question, I might see that others have that as well. And I will need to work through that to address that. So I will do my best to do so. We have about 70 people in our session today. And again, I want to make sure that we address the needs of as many of you as possible to do so. One last thing before we dive into our conversation. I know a lot of presenters like to wait until the very end to give you those resources, but that is prime question time. And I want to make sure that I use as much of that as possible for that. So I'm actually going to make sure that we highlight our resources right off the bat. And if you haven't yet, feel free to go into the session through Zoom Events and download our Strong Start session guide with a helpful display of links and resources that you'll be able to access that track along with what we'll talk about today. In addition to that, I also want to make sure that we provide you with a lot of those links at the end that usually might arise. So I'm going to go ahead and put our feedback links here. The first one is going to be for our purposes within DreamBox so that we know how we can adjust our sessions to meet your needs. And then the second one is going to be through San Francisco Unified. It'll be the district's feedback link. And don't feel like you have to fill these out now. Again, I just want to make sure that they're there for you so you have them, just because life happens and something might draw your time and focus away as needed. And we certainly want to respect that. So if you need those links, they're there. I'll bring them back in at the end of our session. So again, just to repeat for those of you jumping in, if you don't see DreamBox and Clever yet, make sure you put a request in, a ticket to the IT team to make sure that you do have access to that. I know that it's updating site by site, so it may not be universal for everybody at this time. You make sure you want to see your students in there so you can start adjusting some of those settings. And then additionally, we'll also be providing you with additional insight as far as how to get that. So to clarify for those that are just entering, make sure you reach out to the San Francisco Unified IT team if you don't see Clever access quite yet. And then secondly, this is available for all teachers and students this year. So with that, I can't spend too much more time on the Clever elements as a DreamBox representative, because I want to make sure we get into what DreamBox does so you can start to plan and envision how to support learners with the platform this year. So it's my hope that by the time we conclude our session today, that by the end of today's learning, we'll be able to summarize how DreamBox Math adapts both within and between lessons to personalize and differentiate math learning for all students in real time, as well as understand its approach to integrating instruction and assessment to provide in-depth data on student understanding. You'll also see how we design lessons to build deep conceptual understanding for students and provide them with agency, as well as a space for exploration. We'll also talk a little bit about student and educator actions to support a successful launch of DreamBox in your classroom this year, especially around the first 4 weeks. And then finally, we'll navigate through the DreamBox Insights dashboard to make sure that you understand where to find everything you need to get started. So with that, let's go ahead and jump ahead. DreamBox is accessible to all members of the San Francisco Unified teacher and student communities. And so if it's been a while since you've interacted with DreamBox or it's fairly new to you, let's talk about some basics. DreamBox is a K-8 math platform designed to complement teachers' core math instruction by personalizing instruction for all learners. The lessons and learning environment are strategically designed to promote conceptual understanding as students problem solve with the support of digital tools and manipulatives built into every lesson. As students work in these lessons, DreamBox is collecting data and assessing student thinking in order to adapt to a just right level for each learner at the moment of interaction. DreamBox generally recommends students complete about 5 lessons per week to reach optimal growth goals and to provide adequate, meaningful, tangible support. Now, when students in a class log into DreamBox for the very first time, as opposed to some other platforms that you may have seen, they're presented with a choice of lessons. Now, the lessons that are presented are based on the student's grade level, as well as the time of the school year. Students are always presented with a choice in order to support and develop learner agency. Students will choose their first lessons and begin to then power what we refer to as the DreamBox adaptive engine to find their optimal learning zone. And as the student chooses and engages in lessons, DreamBox will continuously assess their understanding and make changes to their learning path. DreamBox will respond and analyze to every interaction with a manipulative, every response that they give. Let's watch how this happens over time as students get started with DreamBox learning after signing in for the first time.
As soon as the student engages with their first lesson, DreamBox begins collecting data on how the student works and learns. At the completion of even this first lesson, data is recorded and the learning pathway will update its recommended lessons. As the student continues playing, DreamBox is learning the learner, calibrating to their strengths and struggles with every completed lesson. The digital manipulatives allow DreamBox to track the student's interactions and evaluate the strategies used to solve problems, immediately adjusting the level of difficulty, scaffolding, and pacing of the curriculum. The more data that DreamBox collects, the more personalized the learning becomes, adjusting in real time to find and engage the student with their optimal learning zone. As DreamBox calibrates to the student, mistakes are okay. Wrong answers help DreamBox find the best lessons that will reinforce concepts and build on their strengths. It takes time to really find a student's optimal learning zone. Give new students 4 to 6 weeks of consistent play to allow DreamBox to accurately track a student's learning path.
So to summarize, just as you would in your classroom with your students, DreamBox is taking in comprehensive data about student thinking and adjusts to assess their understanding in a personalized way. Now, we want students to feel like they're successful off the bat. So one of the settings you may want to consider as you get started, because DreamBox initially starts students with lessons that are correlated to a rostered grade level, if you have multiple points of data to indicate that this starting level may not be appropriate for students, you'll be able to adjust their initial placement level before they get started with DreamBox. So if you have that 4th grade student and you have points of data to indicate that they're currently achieving at a 1st grade level, those 4th grade lessons might be frustrating to start off. It might lead to disengagement, classroom management issues. We want students to feel momentum as they begin on this journey. So you can set DreamBox to start them off with 1st grade level lessons, and DreamBox will adjust and adapt from there. Now, I wouldn't advise setting that unless a student is 2 or more grade levels beyond their rostered grade level. DreamBox would then adjust them fairly quickly. But if it's 2 or more grade levels, we want to accelerate that timeline for students to get them where they need to be more accurately sooner. And we'll take a look at this task together in the final section of our session today. A question coming through in the chat, and I am going to share a link as far as seeing this from the student side to get a sense in regards to a sample link to explore lessons, at least from a sampling level. We'll be able to actually do that a little bit later on. Let's talk a little bit about the lessons while we're on the topic of conversation and take a closer look at how students will engage in learning throughout their personalized lesson pathways. Now, the DreamBox math curriculum was designed to support the dynamic process of learning and transfer by including a variety of tasks that empower students to think for themselves. So when learning a concept, students are presented with a variety of learning tasks, mistake analysis, assessments, and scaffolding throughout the lesson pathway based off of 3 different lesson types that reflect phases of rigor. Exploring and sense making at the conceptual element, looking for structure and relationships to address that bridging phase of rigor identified by Dr. Jerry Confrey at NC State. And then fluency in application and procedural skills as students begin to get to that end stage where they've transitioned from the conceptual model to something more abstract and representational, such as numerical representations, expressions, or equations. So let's look at an example of an early multiplication concept to see these various lesson types in action. So as a student begins exploring partial products with arrays, a student will explore how rows and columns of an array connect to multiplication, representing the exploring and sense-making element. As a student shows understanding, DreamBox might then push the student to look for structure and relationships by asking the student to connect to units on a ruler and then build the array using predefined partial products. So as they move towards deeper understanding of this skill, the labels are then removed, as well as the unit squares, to further assess student understanding of partial products. So that we can see the stages of progression as students move towards more fluent processing of this skill. So you'll notice that this lesson design allows students to explore ideas in a conceptual way without direct instruction, promoting problem solving and critical thinking as they build their own strategies. DreamBox then integrates this guided instruction with assessment, supporting student learning by increasing the level as they demonstrate understanding, allowing student thinking to move through these types of lessons at their own pace until they reach full proficiency with this concept. Now, great question in the chat. As far as access to this, this is accessible to all students within San Francisco Unified. The focus is on K-8 standards, which does incorporate, based off a question in the chat, upper elementary as well. Now, if a student is not demonstrating success with the tasks presented in the lesson, DreamBox will also adapt to support the student. The manipulatives built into lessons allow DreamBox to collect rich data on student thinking that allows DreamBox to make changes or provide feedback about what the student might be doing incorrectly. Now, compared to a lot of other platforms, the lessons are not pre-arranged. There is no sequence of predetermined problems that a student will be presented with. The problems adjust in real time as students navigate through and demonstrate various levels of understanding. And so every lesson will vary. So these variances in lessons might include changing the number of questions that a student needs in a lesson, the type of task they're presented with, or providing personalized feedback about the student mistakes. And when we say personalized, we go beyond simply correct or incorrect. We highlight exactly what a student may need to consider to be precise with their next effort. And if a student is not responsive to adjustments made within the lesson, DreamBox will step in only after maybe 2 or 3 attempts to model the correct response with the phrase, "I'll help you with this one." It'll then prompt the student with "your turn." So students are receiving 3 strong elements of feedback that when we see in place, regardless of subject in education, students are more likely to respond to: immediacy, specificity, and the opportunity to apply that feedback sooner. Now, if the student is not demonstrating understanding consistently throughout the lesson, it'll be marked through your dashboard reporting as completed with no demonstrated understanding. We want to encourage students to persevere through lessons and try their best to navigate through a concept, to give them opportunities to discover, but we also want that struggle to be productive. So we give students credit for completing lessons, even if they complete lessons without demonstrated understanding, because we want to value that journey. Now, let's explore what this looks like for a student. Very quickly, DreamBox assesses student understanding through adaptive play. DreamBox lessons are more of an instructional playground, a math lab for students to try out ideas as presented to them in areas that they select. There are 3 types of DreamBox lessons relating to exploring and sense making, building relationships between models and more abstract representations, and fluency application opportunities. One way that DreamBox adapts within a lesson is with specific feedback and adjusting the problems and type of tasks that they see, as well as the number of lessons. So even if 2 students are working on the same lesson simultaneously, it will not be presented the same way. They'll see different lessons. They'll get different feedback. It might take longer for one or another because of different number of problems. And I can continue talking about DreamBox. Let's go ahead and see it for ourselves, though. So I'm going to go ahead and put this link into the chat: dreambox.com/K-8-math-lessons. This will be an opportunity for you to play around with some sample lessons through the lens of a learner. I'm going to go ahead and click on the link and share with you what you can expect to see when you get there. Don't worry about anything you might see at the top as far as requesting a demo. As we mentioned, San Francisco Unified has purchased DreamBox across the district for accessibility. If you scroll down a little bit once you get here, you'll notice that you have the opportunity to explore DreamBox through 3 grade level environments. We have K through 2nd, 3rd through 5th, 6th grade, and above. If you prefer to explore the fuller DreamBox experience from a student perspective, feel free to select the environment that best reflects the students that you support. And feel free to select the language as well. DreamBox is fully available in both English and Spanish. Additional languages forthcoming as we fully vet the language through as far as making it authentic. We don't want to utilize and impose an AI translator on that because we know that that's not always the most accurate means of communicating that. As you click on these environments, there may be some tutorial videos. Feel free to skip those, set up an avatar. However, the key is to get into lessons. So you can choose a lesson through any of those environments, or if you'd like to more directly get into a lesson, feel free to scroll down a little bit further and you can select based off of specific grade levels. So if you support a specific grade level, you can choose that grade level and play through one of the lessons that is there. Again, available in both English and Spanish. As you play through a lesson, I encourage you, maybe not every time, but once or twice, try to be wrong. On purpose, with purpose. Think about ways that your students might generally approach a task. If you see 5 times 4, feel free to put 9 as your response. We know students will add if they're uncertain about that concept of multiplication. Try 54. We know students will juxtapose 2 values to make a larger number because that's their concept. Think about how your students would respond. Use the help and hint buttons built into lessons. Listen to the feedback. Explore the manipulative. Use the tools built into lessons. Let's take a good 5 minutes to explore these lessons. Now, you'll be able to pick the language of the lessons here. Students won't be able to select their language, but that's something that you'll be able to set for them in your dashboard. So let's take a good 5 minutes. I will monitor the chat for any additional questions you have. I'll mute my microphone and camera so as to not provide a further distraction. And we'll come back together in 5. I see some laughter on that. I get it. I get it. We'll come back in 5 and go from there. All right, we're going to come back together in about 30 seconds. If you're still in a lesson, feel free to wrap up this final problem, close out of that lesson, and then let's come back together so we can understand a little bit more about the learning environments for students. All right, welcome back, everybody. Yeah, really interesting to see the level of depth of analysis in regards to those manipulatives, as well as the type of feedback students are getting in DreamBox. Very precise to what they're doing and supportive in nudging them along. It's not always explicit, direct instruction. It is when it needs to be. However, we want to make sure that students have an opportunity to understand specifically where they might consider thinking to move them along in that process, no matter what stage they're at within the problem. Now, a few other elements here to consider. You saw as we were entering into some of those lessons that DreamBox provides 3 different interfaces for students called learning environments. Now, each of these learning environments is designed to reflect maturity and interest level for students at different ages. Now, if what we have available here in each of these grade level environments matches up to interest levels, we also want to make sure that they have access to appropriate lessons. Now, with DreamBox, learning is centered around students. So students choose their lessons from a selection of DreamBox's recommendations, allowing them to practice learner agency and influence their learning pathways. Whenever a lesson is complete, DreamBox updates the students' learning environments to provide the next series of best fit lessons to choose from. We also have built-in incentives to support learners with motivation and engagement. Lesson content also, and I think this is really important in regards to a student's journey through math, lesson content is independent of the learner's age, so that all lessons can be played in any environment, and learners of the same age can receive lessons of appropriate levels. So what that means is, within the lessons that they choose from, students might receive lessons at a grade level beyond where they're at rostered because they've demonstrated proficiency in that domain. Like you may have students that are generally strong in geometry or measurement and data, and they've demonstrated such, and so they'll receive those lessons as opportunities for enrichment. You may also see that same student struggling with concepts of multiplication and division, and so they might receive lessons at a different grade level within that domain, and that is designed intentionally to meet the students where they are. Additionally, in order to be mindful of the student's curiosity without imposing any sort of metric on them as far as their worth as a student, we never reveal the grade level or standard of a lesson that a student is working on. It's never presented as part of our environment or dashboard. If a student, let's say a 4th grader, needs work on a 1st grade lesson, the 1st grade lesson will be presented as a 4th grade lesson. It'll look like it fits into every other lesson in the 4th grade environment, so that students don't have to worry about feeling self-conscious about the work that they're doing. They've selected that lesson. They've demonstrated curiosity about wanting to do better with that skill, and we want to honor that with dignity. So a couple of questions there. If a student is demonstrating that they're struggling with a lesson, they have access to lessons supports, hint buttons and help buttons within the lesson to guide them into what to do next. So we want to make sure they have access to volume so they can hear the lesson feedback. There are resources within your dashboard that you can use to support students, talk through it with them, as well as learn a little bit more about the design of the lessons. And we'll share those resources with you later on as we dive into the teacher dashboard. In addition to that, on the teacher dashboard, you'll be able to view student levels and progress. So even though it's not presented to the students, you'll see the level of the work that they're doing. And you can use that information to facilitate conversations for student conferences, as well as parent conferences too. We want to make sure that students are engaged in the process of completing lessons. So each environment includes built-in incentives for students to keep them motivated as they play lessons. In K through 2, when students complete a lesson, they'll see a backpack appear that can contain a token or an adventure friend. In this environment, it's narrative driven. Students choose from 4 story themes and work to earn goals for these stories. When students complete a story, they earn a certificate. There's also engagement areas where they can view the incentives that they've earned and spend their tokens on brief mini games. They're designed to be short so that they spend more on those games. And if students run out of tokens to play games, they want to keep playing, they've got to go back into lessons to earn more. For third grade and beyond, students can continue to earn tokens, but they'll also earn badges for specific tasks and see their avatars level up from bronze to silver to gold. Sometimes, after completing lessons, students will see a blue Nano Game tile appear in place of one of those lessons. These games are designed to be very brief and quick, 10 to 15 seconds at most. And whether they decide to choose it or not, the next activity, the game is removed and replaced with a lesson. You also have the ability within your dashboard to restrict access to these engagement areas if you want to focus students exclusively on certain days of the week, just on lessons. Now, let's talk a little bit about kicking things off and launching DreamBox in the classroom to start off the school year, because the ultimate goal with DreamBox is student growth. So how do we reach these goals with DreamBox? Let's take a look at a few keys to a strong start. First, there are a few things that we'll want to prepare before launching DreamBox in the classroom. And this includes implementation planning and a few technical elements. Then you'll introduce students to DreamBox and have them start playing. Over the first few weeks, DreamBox will be collecting important data to understand your students, and you'll be getting key initial insights. After students have been playing for about 4 weeks with consistency, and with consistent, we mean 5 or more lessons a week, you can start using standards-based data to support classroom instruction, make assignments, or monitor all the growth that your students are making. So let's start off with a quick to-do list. First, time. It's the one thing we all have, but nobody ever has enough of. Setting aside time and space for students to work on lessons is important, but we also want to make sure that the time is used productively. So rather than setting time as your goal for your students, we encourage you to use lessons as that goal. So we recommend focusing on setting a goal at 5 or more lessons a week. That's based off of external data that we have from multiple academic institutions, Harvard's Graduate School of Education, Stanford's Research Institute, Johns Hopkins, that indicate that when students are hitting 5 or more lessons, not only are they attaining more skills and standards than those who complete fewer, but they're doing so at a faster rate. Now, the times indicated here represent how much time is generally advised for students to reach that goal of 5 per week. So for K through 2 students, it likely takes about 30 to 60 minutes. Third grade and beyond, about 60 to 90 minutes. And that doesn't have to be every day. If you want to break that out into time 3 times a week, let's say for 10 to 20 minutes each block, that can be useful. We have so many things that we need to manage and overlook and see in our classroom. This is a supportive element. It doesn't have to be the dominant piece of your instruction. It should be a support tool. Next, we want to make sure we have structures for providing that time and space for students. So how can students play DreamBox? We generally recommend that students have dedicated time during small groups or station rotations. DreamBox also works as a wonderful whole class block of time as a warm-up to start your period, as potentially differentiated warm-ups, as possibly differentiated homework as well, but also as a great independent activity for remote or hybrid learning too. As for your role initially, you'll choose a day-to-day each week so that you can log in and monitor student data. Now, in addition, we want to empower students to be able to follow along with how they're progressing, specifically around lesson goals. So we wanted to make it easier for you to guide students on where to reference that data. And we try to make it as visible and accessible as possible to learners. When students complete a lesson, their weekly data is updated visibly. So if you have a student here in K through 2 and they click on their avatar, it'll show them how many lessons they've completed for the current week. Third grade and beyond, if they click on the tab to the side, it'll unfurl and they'll see their totals as well as time spent for the current session and the week in general. A comment in the chat. let me go ahead and paste it because I think this is a helpful point to bring up in this regards for implementation strategies. Does it work well as an activity for early finisher students? Generally, I would advise that universal time for accessibility is provided so that all students have the opportunity to explore lessons. We see generally that early finisher students enjoy enrichment exploration in DreamBox, but those who need it the most, if it's seen as a may-do in the must-do, may-do structure, don't get the opportunity to do so. So we encourage utilizing it as a station rotation or as providing whole class dedicated time for students to work on it so that all students have the opportunity to explore lessons. Now, another follow-up question, as far as reasonable expectations, is there a way to limit how much students are on DreamBox? So we currently don't have a way to restrict access to DreamBox or shut down after a certain number of lessons. However, you can certainly communicate that. If we see that students are spending way too much time on DreamBox, specifically at home, that might skew their data. In particular, if we know that they have more time for family members to potentially help them, that might communicate accidentally to DreamBox that they're further along in their understanding than they really are. We want DreamBox to know what the student can do, not a family member. So what we'll be able to do is show you where you can download a letter to send home to communicate to family members, one, how to follow along with their students' progress and usage, but also how to appropriately support students if they're working on lessons. A lot of times when parents hear they don't have to help their students, it's a burden off of their shoulder because a lot of our families have enough going on at home as it is. We also want to communicate that to students and to families. DreamBox is not a test. It's not a quiz. It's not a grade they're going to receive. It is an instructional play math lab designed to explore ways of thinking. And we don't want to quantify that with a grade or a score. And so parents don't have to help family members. Now, another consideration, and we'll touch upon this briefly, is starting things off with DreamBox. What I'd like to do right now is look at some of these elements of preparation. If you have access to DreamBox, if not, again, reference that Strong Start guide for when you do have access through Clever, and all of this information will be provided. We won't be providing a slide deck due to company policy and proprietary needs, but all of the resources that are in this deck will be in that Strong Start guide and the resources of this session. Firstly, you want to adjust initial settings, and that is in regards to placement levels as well as language. We'll talk a little bit about that right now. Actually, let me go ahead and do that. Let's jump over to the dashboard so you can get a chance to see what this looks like from the educator's side. Please feel free to follow along with me. Big Chrome extension fan here, custom cursor, play around with that. That can be a nice incentive to use to inspire students. Those that meet 5 or more lessons a week, you get entered into a drawing. And if you win the drawing, you choose the cursor for the week for class. Ooh, that's powerful for students. They love that. Now, let's go ahead and talk about what you'll have here. First is the home page. Let me just check and make sure you're able to see my screen. Okay, I am sharing with everybody. You're able to see my slide here. Very good. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look through the dashboard. The first thing you're going to see on your dashboard is the student usage table, where you'll be able to see lesson completion information for this week or the previous week. You can sort any of the columns in DreamBox by clicking on the header to sort in ascending or descending order. So this is helpful to keep track of whether students are meeting those lesson usage goals that you've set. You can also compare that to the amount of time they're spending on DreamBox. My advisement, if you see students are spending more than 15 minutes per lesson, that might be an indicator of struggle. Check in with the student to see if they need some support in managing that time. But you'll also be able to see what lesson they've been working on too. If you notice that you have students who've been struggling with a lesson, which is usually an indicator with this orange triangle with the exclamation point to indicate that they've worked on a lesson multiple times and are still struggling with it. And we want to work students to that point where they recognize struggle as they're making multiple efforts and can't quite connect. Not that it's tough for me once, so I don't know what to do anytime ever. We want to break those habits of learned helplessness for students. One helpful strategy, click 3, then me. So what we mean by that is use 3 of the supports built into DreamBox before you ask anybody else for help. We want to empower you to look for the answer yourself using the resources that are available. And that includes our hint buttons, our support toolbars, and our progress bar to see how far along you are, as well as clicking on the speaker to repeat instructions. Click 3, then me. That's more of like a classroom pedagogy practice that I've used personally that I'm more than happy to share anytime the opportunity arises. Now, a quick tool to use to identify students who might be struggling is may need attention. So if you scroll down a little bit further, we have alerts and achievements. And you can see which lessons students have been struggling with this selected week. If you see multiple students struggling with a lesson, it's not ideal, but it's good information because now we have a small group we can pull. If I click on one of these students, when I select View Student Activity, it brings me to their activity feed. I can see all of the lesson activity they've demonstrated over the last 30 days. So I can see the lesson, the standard, how much time they spent on each lesson, the outcome of the lessons. And if there is a lesson I would like to support students with and talk them through, I don't want to do the lesson for them. And I don't want to do it in their dashboard and skew their data. When you click on Play Lesson, anytime you see that, it brings up a demo version of that lesson that you can interact with students and use as a context for discourse. Talk through what to do in a lesson. Don't just bring it up and have the student do the lesson in front of you. Control the input and have the students describe to you what you should do. Unlock that sense of reasoning and discourse so that it can reveal any misconception or error that might be prevalent, so that when they go back and attempt this lesson again at their own desk with their own device, they have a new strategy they can apply to try again on their own terms. One more element of the dashboard that I'd like to share with you. Clear out that filter so we can go to the whole class. But if you scroll down a little bit more into this section of roster management, you'll see a single sign-on letter. Parent communication is always of importance in getting our families on board. So you can click on Save to download a PDF or click Print for a physical copy. So depending on how you utilize parent communication, if you use a digital tool to reach out to parents remotely, the PDF might be the way to go. If you want to print out the physical copy as well, you have access to this. And this communicates how families can support DreamBox and provides them with a little bit of an overview on how students can access from home, on how families can set up their own dashboard to follow along with data and usage and progress and growth, and tips for home usage. Some ways that families can support students without going overboard. So we don't see any of those 30, 40 lessons a week where families are helping out on everything. These 3 tips communicated can be very empowering in getting more out of DreamBox, including allow for 15 to 20-minute sessions throughout the week, encourage completion of every lesson that's started, mistakes are okay, and my favorite, number 3, we know it's difficult, but please resist the urge to help with answers so that your student doesn't move ahead before they're truly ready. One other note, this lesson is available in both English and Spanish for you to utilize, matching the current languages that we do have access through with DreamBox. Now, to follow along some of our earlier questions and conversations, you'll be able to track along with your students' lessons as far as levels and progress through the reports that you'll start to populate. After the first 4 weeks, you'll start to see in your reports as a whole class where your students are in their proficiency with standards. So you can start to use that to inform your instruction, identify which prerequisites for upcoming lessons. Students will be able to see that, as well as identify areas where your students might be performing with strength to help save some instructional time down the line. If you have a 3-week unit on fractions coming up and you see proficiency in that domain down the line, maybe you only need 1 week for that. So that's helpful to inform your planning. It's also helpful on the individual student side. When we want to communicate progress with students, you have a helpful report there where you can explore where students are demonstrating areas of need and success, as well as areas of potential struggle. This will highlight, so I can bring up an example here. Let me do a different report here. This will highlight for a student areas in which they've demonstrated growth over a set period of time. This is helpful both for students who may not have access to where they're demonstrating proficiency and can use a boost. If Nathan here is feeling a little down on his math skills, he may not realize that he's actually performing beyond grade level in number and operations in base 10, specifically in regards to operations related to decimals to the hundredths. Like that could be powerful as motivation to move forward. We can also identify areas of need that may not be immediately visible. And again, that's the importance of balancing DreamBox lessons to just assignments. We want to make sure that we pick up on some of those areas we may not see most immediately. And so you can see areas in which students might need further support and work, either within DreamBox or outside. It's also very helpful for families to see this report so they know exactly where their student is in regards to different grade levels and domains. Now, moving on from the reports area, if you feel like you'd like to learn more about how to get started with DreamBox, we have some helpful resources under the PD section. So we clicked on PD, and it takes you to a section called DreamBox University. This provides you with links to guides and printables, including a lesson plan for starting off the year and launching DreamBox with your students, as well as mini lessons and videos to provide visual walkthroughs to explore different elements of DreamBox, including reading reports, creating assignments, or introducing students to DreamBox whole class at the start of the year. If you'd like to learn more about the design and pedagogy behind a specific lesson, you can click on our curriculum catalog, and it'll provide you with mini lessons navigating you through the process of the design and ways to support students with academic vocabulary, clarity on how to utilize the manipulative, and prompts to nudge students in the right direction when meeting with them one-on-one or small group. Now, something that is coming through as a question, we don't want students, I'm trying to look at how to phrase this question. There's no limit to how many lessons students can play per week or per month. We can communicate that as an expectation and let students know what we can see. However, we don't want to hold students back from demonstrating areas in which they are communicating understanding. And so we want to make sure that students are clear on how to use DreamBox to get the most out of that experience without providing any imposed caps on them so they can explore at their own pace. We feel like if students are demonstrating an excitement for math to explore a certain area, that we celebrate that, because we want to make sure that students feel connected to math through whichever area that they have. And it's okay if students explore concepts that we might have coming up. I'd much rather students explore that so they're ready for my lesson than feel self-conscious about, oh, it's not my way, so I don't feel great about it. However, students feel that they can communicate their understanding with each other and internally, we want to celebrate that and honor that. A couple of other points as we start to wind down our time here. I want to highlight those settings that we discussed that are extremely useful in managing how our students interact with DreamBox to align with our vision for our instructional planning. Two main settings I want to bring to your attention. The first, under the roster. When we click on the roster section, there are two settings I would bring to your attention as far as the ones most likely to adjust. In fact, probably the only ones you'll need to adjust. And that's the initial placement level. So if you have, let's say Ava here is a fifth grader, she's brand new to DreamBox, hasn't done any lessons yet, but I have data to indicate that she is currently achieving at a second grade level. I want her to start DreamBox at a second grade level. Now, if there are some fifth grade concepts I'd like to support with down the line, I can create assignments that she can select. Nothing on DreamBox is forced upon students. They would have to select that assigned lesson, but we want to give her the opportunity to choose it from her option. But as far as those initial lessons I want to start with, if I see that that data indicates that she's currently achieving at a second grade level, I want her to see second grade lessons so she can be successful right off the jump. Now, this is not something you can set once students have begun with DreamBox. So once you have your roster and you have that data on your students, this is something you'll look at before they get started. And I wouldn't worry about setting this for students unless they're 2 or more grade levels beyond their rostered grade level. If it's within 1, DreamBox will adapt to them quickly through lesson play. Secondly, this question had come through. This is where you can adjust the language between English and Spanish. We don't have a set timeline for any additional languages quite yet, but that process of vetting them is ongoing. Chinese is one of those primary ones that we're still working on to support. Question in the chat, do students choose their password or teachers create them? It's through Clever. So they would sign into DreamBox through Clever. And so there's no need to worry about passwords, how they would sign into anything else through Clever. It'll be one of the tiles that they see on their dashboard. So it's not an additional password that they need to remember. One additional setting I would consider is engagement restrictions. We talked about those areas of students can go into the arcade or my house to look at their achievements or personalize their dashboard in 3rd grade and beyond. If you feel that some of those areas might be a distraction from completing lessons, you can set which days of the week and which hours of the day outside of classroom hours students can access those. I'm not a fan of taking things away from students. I like to give. So you might decide at the beginning of the year to uncheck some of these. And then later on in the year, maybe a few weeks in, add 1 day or so that students have earned enough to be able to utilize in those areas. You can decide if students do have access to those engagement areas outside of classroom hours, or even adjust what those classroom hours are. If you have dedicated DreamBox time in the morning, but then feel better about them accessing those areas in the afternoon, these don't necessarily have to match exactly the instructional day. You can set them up however you'd like to meet your needs. There have been some wonderful questions come through here in the chat. And just as a cap on our conversation, after those first 4 weeks of consistent lessons, you'll start to see that data come through those reports and be able to make instructional decisions based off of what you're seeing. Not only will you be able to see which standards students have demonstrated proficiency in and what lessons they've been working on, but you'll also be able to see growth along the way. DreamBox captures as a grade level metric their initial standing and updates daily their current standing, not just overall, but across every domain in the Common Core state standards for California. So have a 5th grade fraction unit, but you see that your students standing in fractions is at a 3rd grade level where they're still foundationally making sense of halves, thirds, fourths, what a fraction represents. That's good information for you to have moving forward in terms of planning your instructions and working with and through that. Additionally, as you start to capture this data, you'll see those areas of need across your class. And so you can intentionally create assignments based off of that data. A reminder on assignments, these are available then as choices in addition to what DreamBox is recommending. So if you're going to use assignments, make sure that you're clear on communicating the expectations on when students should work on those. But you'll be able to create assignments based off of Common Core standards, clusters, domains at any grade level, or through more specific ideas and concepts in our DreamBox learning units. So just to clarify those engagement restrictions, no, you would restrict access to games or elements of personalization. You wouldn't access anything related to math. Students will still be able to choose their lessons based off of what DreamBox is recommending and potentially what you have assigned. Great question for that. To wrap up our time together, some things to consider as we look ahead. As that Clever rostering comes through and you get access, start to keep up on adjusting those initial placement levels. It shouldn't take too long once we have that data. Also, make sure you have a plan for launching DreamBox in the classroom, utilizing those resources in the dashboard to make sure that you are pulling from DreamBox University for videos or printables you'd like to utilize. Explore what's there. See what you have to work with. Make sure you have a habit or routine built into your schedule to monitor lessons completed. It shouldn't be more than once or twice a week at this phase, just to check and see who's completing lessons and who needs more time and help. And then lastly, beyond simply monitoring students who might be falling shy of those goals, celebrate those who are making them. Celebrate early and celebrate often so students know what their expectation is to meet. If you have further questions, make sure you utilize our support page through DreamBox. And then if you have any further questions as far as support, I can stick around to illustrate this very briefly as far as where to go to play through those lessons to guide them through. I wanted to bring up those feedback pages as well. That is the district's feedback link. And then I'll put ours up there as well. So you have both. And then in addition to that, here's our link and here's the San Francisco Unified link. Oh, there we are. If you have further questions, again, feel free to reach out to our support team. And if you need access to Clever, make sure you connect with the IT department and put in those tickets. So a follow-up question there for a quick reminder, in terms of those lessons, let me get back into my dashboard here and pull that up for us. Let's say you see that a student is struggling with a lesson. For that student, you can pull up their activity feed report, and for any lesson that they've worked on, you can click through Play Lesson and play through that lesson together with your students. And if you'd like more information on those lessons, that's available with all of our resources in DreamBox University at the section. And as a teacher resource, feel free to click on Curriculum Catalog. And then a follow-up question, is the student roster generated by the district? Or, yeah, you don't have to worry about entering a roster. That is all updated through Clever automatically. It's been a pleasure spending the time with you, everybody. Great group. Thank you. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day here on Digital District Day. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Michelle. You're very welcome. Thank you, Catherine. We'll go ahead and keep this open for another matter of moments before we shut down. Make sure everybody gets a chance to go to lunch. Take care of yourselves and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. I'm just figuring out how do I leave?
Oh, I got you. I'll shut down the room. You're good.
Okay, okay, thanks. I haven't used Zoom for a few months, so it's like learning again.
Take care, everyone.